Dear Chris, sorry for interrupting your busy and meaningful life. I am a viewer who have just started watching your videos about COVID-19 since several weeks ago. Your videos were extraordinary, with a wide collection of information and your own analysis. I have no doubt that by warning people several months in advance about the danger of COVID-19 and its potential pandemic, you must have saved precious lives, and I fully agree with you about your golden rules of controlling the spread. So, since everyone has their right and responsibility to do their own research, I hope I can present you with some of my opinion and the information I have collected. I know my research would never reach your level, but I suppose I'm in a position which would make my words to some extent of some value. I am a Chinese college student who would have been studying in Japan this year if not the virus. I have started visiting foreign sites ever since middle school. Even though not very regularly, I watch and read from Western news like BBC, MSNBC, Fox News, to Japanese news like NHK and Nikkei Shimbun. Finally, of course, as a Chinese citizen, I gain information from Chinese media, and I'm able to check any reports the government have made so long as they are released on their website. So, I would like to talk about the Bloomberg news report titled "Stacks of Urns in Wuhan Prompt New Questions of Virus Toll." As some of the details it mentioned might cause misunderstanding for those who have never came across a Chinese funeral home. First, I noticed that the report emphasized the people who died from the virus, while in fact, during the 2 months when the epidemic was most fierce, not only those who died of the virus, but everyone who died during the period can't have their cremated ashes returned to their families. This was reported by the media recently, and I also found an article summarizing the policies taken around the nation released on February 5th on the website of Ministry of Civil Affairs of People's Republic of China, indicates that in Wuhan, they had a policy taken during the epidemic. All funeral homes should temporarily stop the funeral services and all cemeteries should be temporarily closed. The cremated ashes should be kept in the funeral home until the cemeteries are opened so they can be buried. So, if you are talking about the whole Wuhan city, I don't know whether there are exceptions, but it's okay to see that all those people lining in the funeral homes were lining for everyone in Wuhan who died during that 2 months. They might even be lining for people who died earlier. I'll explain that later. The Bloomberg news report mentioned 8 funeral homes, and one of them was reported by Chinese media Caixin. I went to read the original report. It was about Hankou Funeral Home. So what made this funeral home so special? The article on Civil Affairs page I mentioned earlier indicated that they started to divide works between funeral homes in late January. Hankou Funeral Home would be in charge of the cremation of all new coronavirus victims in Wuhan, set up special passages and incinerators, and stop charging for cremating victims of the disease from January 26. So, theoretically, Hankou Funeral Home is the only funeral home that received dead bodies from the COVID-19 victims because disposing these bodies would require special disinfection process and the workers would need special protection, which weren't always necessary in terms of dealing with normal bodies. I'm not sure whether Hankou Funeral Home was still dealing with normal bodies. During this interview, the man said he was there to take his father's ash, who died in March 7th, not of COVID-19. So if the man's words and what the policy said were true, the ashes people were lining for in Hankou Funeral Home belonged to the victims of COVID-19 and some other people who died during that 2 months. But since the whole point of the Bloomberg report was to suggest that many people whom the Chinese government claimed to be died of other reasons died of COVID-19, I would leave it aside. In the Bloomberg report, they mentioned trucks shipped in about 2,500 urns on both Wednesday and Thursday, and another picture published by Caixin showed 3,500 urns stacked on the ground inside. And this is the picture of the truck, with the illustration that the driver said he sent about 2,500 urns on both March 25th and March 26th. The following picture showed the stacks of urns with the illustrations saying, "A dozen workers from the funeral home started to move the stacks of urns on the truck to the wing of Jingya Hall, 500 urns a stack, and a total of 7 stacks." So I interpret that these 3,500 urns in the wing include the 2,500 urns sent there in 26, but there were for sure at least 5,000 urns shipped into the Hankou funeral home, and that's a lot of urns. However, I would say that this number can't be a proof of that same amount of people died during that 2 months. To understand this, I must introduce the process related to Chinese funeral homes. I write the following part based on my experience participating in both my grandpa's funeral years ago, and I checked whether my memories were wrong with my relations. I also use pictures from the site of Hankou funeral home. As you might have noticed, the urns in the pictures doesn't seem to have been used. In fact, they seem to be new goods just shipped into a store. Of course, there's a sentence in the Bloomberg report saying it's unclear how many of the urns had been filled. But what will people reading the report imagine? They would imagine a truck of urns already being used, and surely all of them were filled. After all, urns were made to be filled by ashes. We don't know whether they were filled simply because, of course, we can't open them one by one to check. But that's not how it works in China. In China, a funeral home is a comprehensive place. When one of our beloved one dies, we visit the place before the funeral and select urns and all sorts of other little stuff using during the funeral. The room for showcase looks like this. There are urns of all prices and materials, mainly made up of stone, jade, or wood. When we have chosen the ideal urn for our beloved one, the clerk takes out a new urn with unopened packaging from their storehouse, which is same as the sample we have chosen, and reserve it for the cremation. So, it's kind of like choosing a new laptop in a shop. After the funeral in a special hall of the funeral home, the body was sent to be cremated and packed into the urn we have bought. Then, if we have arranged a tomb elsewhere, we may carry the urn away. If we haven't, then the urn can be kept in a storeroom where you can keep these urns till forever, so long as you pay for the yearly fee. So, you see, urns aren't laptops which could go out of date in several years. They were made to be kept till forever, at least for decades. Could the urns that the truck shipped into Hankou funeral home, or for the use of that several days? Yes, of course it's possible, but on the other hand, theoretically, the urns left can still be sold even after 3 more years. By the way, the people who died due to COVID-19 were not only free of charge for fundamental service fee in the funeral home, their family can also choose a free urn made up of serpentine, Lantian jade, or Sichuan white jade. But what if we can prove the whole thing in a more statistical way? Let's look at the figures Bloomberg News provided. The Bloomberg News report was corrected once on March 31st, 2020. They corrected a mistake which I noticed but failed to make this video before March 31st. In the early version, there's a paragraph like this. There were 56,007 cremations in Wuhan in the 4th quarter of 2019, according to the data from the city's Civil Affairs Agency. The number of cremations was 1,583 higher than those in the fourth quarter of 2018, and 2,231 higher than the fourth quarter of 2017, which the reporter obviously used in order to suggest that an abnormal uprise means some people died for an unusual reason. Later, in March 31st, it was corrected into there were 13,856 cremations in Wuhan in the fourth quarter of 2019, according to Bloomberg calculations based on data from the city's civil affairs agency. That was 2,419 lower than in the fourth quarter of 2018. What have happened? You see, the Wuhan City's Civil Affairs Ministry releases a report with a long list of statistics after each season have passed. When the reporter was writing the report, he or she found the number of cremations in the report released after the fourth season in 2019 and compared with the report released after the fourth season of 2018 and 2017. However, the problem is, instead of just talking about the seasons that have just passed, the statistics released after each season adds up the data of all seasons that have passed in that year. In fact, the Civil Affairs Agency's report Bloomberg News reporters have read was named Civil Affairs Agency's Seasonal Report of 2019's fourth season. The reporters must have thought it to be Civil Affairs Agency's seasonal report of 2019's fourth season. My friend and I even made a line chart trying to show that the true seasonal number of cremations in the fourth season of 2019 and why that number is completely normal even if it was indeed higher than that of 2018 and 2017 considering the natural fluctuation. They corrected the number before I could point it out, but I guess it's still worthwhile to show it here since not many people would read that news twice after several days it was published, and it's a good example. So, after this long gavel, am I ready to say that China is completely white? Of course not. In fact, I fully agree that because at the beginning of the epidemic, the test kits weren't enough and the local government intentionally changed the identification standard created by the Central Expert Group. Quite some people died of COVID-19 may not have been counted, but what I mean is China the number one villain? I mean, just tell me one Western country who tested their citizens with enough test kits from the very beginning of the epidemic, and tell me one nation who have investigated all dead bodies in their territory whose owner might be a victim of COVID-19 yet wasn't tested when being alive. You see, as a Chinese citizen, I have a strong intention to prove my motherland's innocence, but can I prove it with the information I have? That is to say, with the information almost the same as what those Bloomberg News reporters have seen. No, I can't. Just like they can't prove China being the number one villain, but they can strongly suggest that China has got the bloodiest hands, just like I tried strongly with emotion to indicate that my nation is not the only big bad wolf. They seem to have strong intention just opposite to mine, that they eagerly used that misinterpreted statistics to prove their suspicion, and now that the figures were corrected, the paragraph seems so weird within the whole Bloomberg report because it's in fact an evidence opposite to their opinion. I made this video to show some information might be useful to you and was to correct the statistical mistake, but there's also something may not be late to say even after the Bloomberg News have corrected its mistake. I want to show that how people owning opposite opinion could organize the same information into two articles suggesting something utterly different. As far as I'm concerned, I feel a very strong need among the Westerners that China's situation has to be worse. China has to be the number one villain. has got to have much more infected, otherwise the world would be collapsing. They might be correct, but I just want to say, if you have started to believe this firmly even before you started to really investigate things, you will certainly gain the same conclusion you have always believed from the very start. Hope my video can be of any use to you.